Yeah, President Trump now saying, though, he's willing to lower levies on China while repeating that any trade deal would need to be fair.
At some point, I'm going to lower them because otherwise you could never do business with them. Yeah. And they want to do business very much. Look, their economy is really doing badly. Their economy is collapsing.
Something serious is shifting in the global order, and the United States may be too distracted to notice. Quietly but decisively, Switzerland, a longtime neutral power and close economic partner, is pulling away from America. The trigger? A steep 31% tariff imposed by the United States government under President Donald Trump. The impact? Around $50 billion in exports now hang in the balance. But the real story runs deeper than trade numbers. It's not just about luxury watches, fine chocolate, or alpine tourism. It's about vital medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, precision instruments, goods that American industries and hospitals depend on. What was once considered a solid trade relationship is unraveling, and Washington's economic strategy appears to be driving the wedge. While Switzerland's president flew to Washington in an attempt to salvage the relationship, another high-level Swiss delegation was already in Beijing. That wasn't just a diplomatic courtesy, it was a calculated move. In Beijing, Swiss Foreign Minister Ignacio Cassis sat down with Chinese officials not for casual talks, but to sign updated trade agreements, resume strategic dialogue, and deepen cooperation in areas ranging from finance and green energy to science education and even winter sports. The symbolism was clear. While the U.S. penalizes its partners, China welcomes them with open arms. Beijing even lifted visa requirements for Swiss travelers, and Switzerland agreed to streamline entry for Chinese tourists and business people. The two countries also named 2025 the Year of Culture and Tourism, a soft power handshake but a meaningful one. To observers of international politics, Switzerland's quiet pivot is no small signal. It's a warning. Switzerland has always held its position as a neutral, non-aligned country. For such a nation to actively deepen ties with China, right after being hit by harsh U.S. tariffs, speaks volumes about where trust is eroding and where it's beginning to build. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the policy fueling these ruptures has a name: strategic uncertainty. It's the new doctrine under Trump's second term, and it's as chaotic as it sounds. The approach favors sudden shifts, surprise penalties, and transactional diplomacy. One week, a nation is praised, the next, it's punished. There's little predictability and even less consistency. For Switzerland, a country that thrives on long-term planning and predictable trade environments, this instability has proved too costly. It's not just about hurt pride, it's about national interest. Swiss pharmaceutical giant Roche announced a $50 billion investment in the U.S. just days after the tariff news, likely an effort to preserve its U.S. market access. But the decision also reflects a growing need to hedge bets in an increasingly volatile global economy. While the U.S. clamps down on allies with economic pressure, China continues its quiet campaign to expand influence. Beijing's strategy doesn't rely on big headlines. Instead, it banks on long-term trust, trade incentives, and stable partnerships. These may lack drama, but they're proving effective, especially with nations that have grown weary of American unpredictability. The difference in tone is impossible to ignore. Washington issues threats and tariffs. Beijing issues invitations and trade upgrades. For many countries caught in the middle, especially those with no appetite for choosing sides, China's pitch is beginning to sound more appealing. The current standoff is also revealing something broader: the erosion of global confidence in U.S. leadership. America was once the reliable cornerstone of the international economic system. Now, its policies are raising eyebrows and causing partners to rethink old alliances. This isn't just Switzerland. Around the globe, similar shifts are happening. India is tightening its trade ties with Russia. Brazil is leaning further into partnerships with China. The BRICS alliance, once seen as a loosely coordinated economic club, is gaining real traction as an alternative power bloc. Even within Europe, calls for more autonomous trade strategies are growing louder. Protectionism, once taboo in international trade, is fast becoming a global trend. Some of this isn't new. Even before Trump returned to the White House, the United States had started to retreat from the globalization model it once led. During President Biden's term, the U.S. government began cutting China out of key tech sectors, increasing subsidies for domestic manufacturing and scrutinizing foreign investment. But Trump's strategy goes further. It's not about reforming trade, it's about rewriting the rules entirely. His administration argues that the world has taken advantage of America for too long, but numbers tell a different story. Trump claims that China slaps the United States with 67% tariffs, In reality, the World Bank puts China's average tariff rate at just 3%. The new U.S. tariffs, even if paused, are expected to hold at around 10%, 3 times higher than China's. Meanwhile, Trump officials boast of over 200 new trade deals. But a closer look shows that many are minor amendments or piecemeal arrangements. Not the kind of comprehensive agreements that shape global policy. There's no overarching strategy, no long-term vision, just a cycle of reaction and escalation. And while Washington plays this high-stakes game, American consumers are paying the price, literally. Import costs are climbing fast. Some Chinese goods now carry tariffs as high as 245%. That means higher prices on essentials, electronics, appliances, clothing, even children's toys. The numbers are already showing strain. Consumer spending is slowing. Even high-income shoppers are scaling back. Warehouses are full because businesses rushed to import goods before new tariffs kicked in. Now orders are down, and projections suggest imports could drop by more than 70% this quarter. And this doesn't just hurt foreign suppliers. American factories, retailers, and shipping companies are feeling the impact too. Those relying on imported components, from Swiss medical tools to Korean electronics, are struggling to maintain output. Some are laying off workers. Others are raising prices. Either way, inflation is creeping back into the picture at a precarious time for the U.S. economy. This situation is especially tough on U.S. manufacturers who were supposed to benefit from the protectionist policies. They can't build products without foreign parts. Auto plants, tech companies, and medical device makers are all caught in the middle. Their costs are going up and their supply chains are breaking down. The phrase "Made in America" is a powerful one, but in practice, it's becoming harder to achieve. Building entirely domestic supply chains isn't just expensive, it's often impossible, especially in industries where precision parts come from half a world away. But perhaps the most long-lasting damage isn't economic, it's diplomatic. Trust is eroding. That's harder to rebuild than any factory floor. As tariff hikes ripple across industries, it's becoming clear that the real fallout from Trump's economic policies isn't just hitting foreign partners. It's hitting American businesses and workers right at home. The promise of bringing manufacturing back, protecting jobs, and making the United States strong again is running headfirst into economic reality. Take a walk through any mid-sized American factory today and you'll hear the same story. Owners facing ballooning input costs, workers on shortened shifts, executives worried not just about this quarter, but whether they'll still be in business next year. It's not that U.S. companies don't want to expand, it's that they can't afford to when every imported bolt, sensor, or microchip costs 20 to 60% more than it did a year ago. The administration's core argument is that tariffs are necessary to level the playing field, but the tools being used, blanket levies, rapid reversals, surprise sanctions, are creating exactly what markets hate most: uncertainty. And uncertainty in the business world kills momentum. Even major industries once considered tariff-proof are feeling it. Take the auto sector. U.S. automakers were supposed to gain ground under Trump's policies. Instead, they're reporting delivery delays, rising component prices, and declining margins. They still depend on parts from Mexico, electronics from Taiwan, specialty metals from Europe. Many of those inputs are now under new trade restrictions. The result? Longer lead times and growing frustration. In technology, it's a similar story. American tech giants, who once led global innovation with seamless global supply chains, are now grappling with shortages, regulatory pressure abroad, and shrinking access to emerging markets. And while Washington sees tariffs as leverage, boardrooms see them as liabilities. But perhaps nowhere is the situation more precarious than in the pharmaceutical sector. The United States has long relied on Swiss firms like Roche and Novartis for high-grade medicines and research partnerships. The recent 31% tariff not only strained those relationships, it raised alarm bells across the healthcare ecosystem. If Roche pulls back on its planned U.S. investment, or if access to its medical innovations is delayed, the consequences won't just be economic. They'll be felt in hospitals, cancer centers, and labs across the country. This is the hidden cost of punitive trade policies. They disrupt not just commerce, but care. Zoom out, and you start to see the deeper issue. America is no longer seen as a reliable trade partner. It's not just adversaries saying this, it's allies, longtime partners, and multinational firms with a century of U.S. presence. Europe's growing distance from Washington is a case in point. Officials in Berlin and Paris are now publicly talking about strategic autonomy, a concept that was once diplomatic filler but now carries real weight. The idea is simple. Don't rely too much on America. because you never know when the rules will change. Even Canada, perhaps America's closest ally, is quietly shifting its posture. After recent trade scuffles and a sharp rise in protectionist rhetoric out of DC, Canadian leaders have started hedging, deepening ties with Asia and South America, and exploring alternative trade routes that bypass U.S. infrastructure entirely. Then there's BRICS. Once a loose association of emerging economies, it's now evolving into a real counterbalance to the U.S.-led order. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are exploring shared currencies, mutual defense initiatives, and deeper economic integration. They're joined now by new invitees like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Argentina, all looking for alternatives to the Western system. The appeal is growing. China's strategy of offering stable, long-term trade deals, without the political strings attached, may be far from perfect, but to many countries, it's preferable to Washington's boom-bust diplomacy, especially when that diplomacy comes with penalties, lectures, and shifting goalposts. Let's take a closer look at China's endgame. While the United States flexes its tariff muscle, China is positioning itself not just as a global factory, but as a global hub, a place to trade, invest, and increasingly, to innovate. At the center of that strategy is semiconductors. For years, the West believed it could choke China's tech advancement by restricting access to high-end chips, and to an extent, it worked. Temporarily. U.S. pressure forced companies like ASML in the Netherlands to stop selling advanced chip-making equipment to China. That slowed progress, but it didn't stop it. In response, China ramped up its domestic R&D. Huawei launched its Ascend 91D chip, not a match for NVIDIA's top processors, but good enough for most applications. And critically, China doesn't need to be the best in the world. It just needs to be good enough for markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. In those regions, affordability and access matter more than cutting-edge performance. And it's working. Chinese chips, once dismissed as second-rate, are now showing up in public infrastructure, security systems, and AI development platforms across the global south. And with each deal signed, each shipment delivered, China is building something far more enduring than market share. It's building loyalty. This brings us to the uncomfortable part of the conversation. U.S. companies are losing ground, and not just overseas. They're being edged out from within China itself. In 2018, American brands were dominant in Chinese malls and cities. Apple, Starbucks, McDonald's, Tesla, each had a thriving business inside China. But today, the landscape is changing. Huawei is eating into iPhone sales. Local coffee chains like Luckin are outpacing Starbucks. Chinese electric vehicle makers are undercutting Tesla by thousands of dollars. And the Chinese government hasn't banned U.S. brands. It hasn't needed to. Through a slow drip of administrative pressure, local procurement incentives, and national pride campaigns, it's nudging its own consumers toward homegrown alternatives. American companies, in turn, are trying to pivot. Many are expanding into India, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian markets. But, the infrastructure isn't yet in place. The scale isn't there, and the trust, built over decades in China, is hard to replicate elsewhere overnight. The irony in all this is sharp. While the U.S. government punishes China through trade restrictions, U.S. corporations are desperate to stay engaged with Chinese consumers, not because they love Beijing's politics, but because their quarterly earnings depend on it. That tension between economic dependence and political hostility is at the heart of this new Cold War. It's not ideological like the last one. It's commercial, technological, and strategic. And well, it's far more complicated. At this point, the key question becomes, what leverage does the United States have left? If tariffs aren't changing behavior, if allies are drifting, if businesses are trapped between two worlds, what's the next move? Some say the answer lies in innovation, that America should double down on research and development, education, infrastructure, and alliances. Others argue for more pressure, more tariffs, more decoupling. But whichever path is chosen, one thing is clear. This isn't just a trade dispute anymore, it's a reckoning. By now, it's clear the global trade landscape of 2025 doesn't just look different, it feels different. Familiar rules are breaking. Alliances that once seemed permanent are now in question. And the United States, once the anchor of economic stability, is no longer being seen as the default partner. For decades, the world revolved around predictable U.S. leadership. American companies led innovation, American banks set financial trends, and American diplomacy held coalitions together. But today, under Trump's second term, Washington is leaning into confrontation, sometimes against adversaries, often against allies. And the cost of that choice is beginning to surface. Let's talk about the ripple effect. Scene 4, inflation. Let's start with inflation. After months of a downtrend, it's creeping back into the American economy. And it's not because of overspending or wage hikes, but because of the tariffs themselves. When foreign parts become more expensive, domestic products do too. Manufacturers are forced to pass those costs on to consumers. And consumers, already stretched by a high cost of living, start cutting back. That cutback is being felt across retail. Major chains are reporting weaker sales. Small businesses, especially those dependent on imported goods, are seeing margins collapse. Some are folding entirely. Others are freezing hiring or reducing hours. And while the administration insists this is short-term pain for long-term gain, the gains are still nowhere in sight. Even sectors that were supposed to benefit, like domestic manufacturing, are running into walls. Why? Because made in America doesn't mean made in isolation. These industries still rely on a global ecosystem: tools from Germany, materials from Chile, components from South Korea. When those supply lines are disrupted, nothing moves, nothing gets built, nothing ships. Beyond economics, there's something else breaking, something harder to measure but easier to feel: trust. International trust in U.S. consistency, business trust in policy direction, even domestic trust in whether the country's leaders understand what's at stake. In the midst of it all, China continues its calculated advance. Beijing isn't outspending Washington militarily. It's not matching the U.S. in cultural reach or democratic alliances, but it's quietly winning in a place that matters just as much: infrastructure, supply chains, and digital ecosystems. Its Belt and Road Initiative, once dismissed as a political stunt, is now funding real railways, ports, and fiber optic networks across Africa, Asia, and parts of Eastern Europe. And with every port built or power plant financed, China isn't just exporting goods, it's exporting influence. The U.S., on the other hand, has pulled back. Budget cuts, diplomatic vacancies, and unpredictable policy swings have all signaled to the world. America's attention span is shrinking. One country that's capitalized on that void is India. While Washington and Beijing battle for dominance, New Delhi has stepped in as a third option. It's striking trade deals, investing in digital infrastructure, and building soft power through education, health, and technology programs. For many nations wary of choosing sides, India offers a middle path, one that doesn't come with steep tariffs or ideological strings. But even India has limits. It can't replace the scale of United States finance or the industrial capacity of China. So as global power decentralizes, the world is slowly learning to operate in a state of flux, where no one country holds the steering wheel. This emerging world is complex, less predictable, more competitive, and it's forcing countries to think differently. Shifting alliances are becoming more evident in the current geopolitical landscape. That includes longtime U.S. allies like South Korea and Japan. Both have begun diversifying their supply chains, investing in Southeast Asia, and exploring stronger bilateral trade agreements that bypass Washington. They aren't cutting ties, but they're hedging their bets. Even Australia, a staunch U.S. partner in the Pacific, has begun strengthening its economic links with ASEAN nations and the European Union. Quietly but deliberately, countries are adapting to the possibility that the U.S. may no longer be the most reliable player at the table. At home, the story is no less turbulent. Farmers, once vocal supporters of Trump, are now among those hardest hit by retaliatory tariffs. Soybeans, pork, corn, products that once had ready buyers in China and Europe, are piling up with nowhere to go. Subsidies help, but they don't replace lost markets. And rural America is starting to feel the pinch. Tech giants, too, are being squeezed. The loss of Chinese market access isn't just theoretical. It's showing up in earnings reports, investor calls, and layoffs. While some firms are relocating operations to India and Vietnam, the transition is slow, and China's own tech sector is accelerating. Take microchips. China's Ascend 91D isn't world-class yet, but it's functional. And in places like Kenya, Indonesia, and Brazil, functional is all that's needed. Huawei is flooding these markets with affordable AI processors, and local governments are eager to build AI labs, facial recognition networks, and smart city infrastructure at a fraction of the Western price tag. With each deal signed, a dependency forms, not just on Chinese technology, but on Chinese standards, Chinese ecosystems, Chinese ideology. This is the real battleground, not in tanks or warships, but in routers, processors, and power grids. Washington still has one powerful card to play: innovation. The United States is home to the most dynamic research universities, the most inventive startups, and some of the strongest financial systems. But that advantage only holds if it's paired with coherent policy, global cooperation, and long-term planning. So far, that's been lacking. The bigger picture is this: the United States isn't losing the trade war because it lacks strength. It's losing ground because it's playing a game of reaction, while others are playing strategy. Every time Washington imposes a new tariff, or issues a new sanction, or reneges on an agreement, it sends a message. And that message, increasingly, is that America is unpredictable. But global leadership isn't about being feared, it's about being trusted. Right now, the world is watching. From Zurich to Jakarta, from Nairobi to Sao Paulo, nations are rethinking alliances, recalculating risks, and reimagining their future. Some may still stand with the United States out of loyalty, history, or shared values, but others, many others, are exploring a different path. One where economic policy isn't dictated by Twitter. One where trade deals come with consistency, not coercion. One where globalization, though imperfect, is still preferable to fragmentation. The 2025 trade war is more than a policy disagreement. It's a test of America's leadership, its relationships, and its reputation. And if Washington doesn't recognize the long-term consequences of short-term aggression, the damage may be lasting. The world won't stop turning. But if the U.S. keeps isolating itself, it may wake up one day to find it's no longer at the center. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if you value deep reporting like this, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to stay updated on the stories that really matter. We'll see you in the next report.